Dear friends, thank you very much for coming back. So today we are having the fifth lecture entitled Russian Economy, Modern History and the 21st Century Trends, which is the part of the course Russian Studies offered by the Russian Academy of National Economy and Public Administration under the President of the Russian Federation. Since 1991, the Russian national economy has undergone serious transformation, which we have discussed a bit with you in previous lectures. This is associated with transition to the market economy, so the private form of ownership, active integration into global financial system and market, as well as reforms of the government and legislation in the field of business activity. And currently, Russian economy is one of the largest global economies, possessing colossal reserves of natural resources and great potential for innovative development. Russian economy plays a major role in the world exchange due to logistic routes, for example, the Northern Sea route to China and other trading partners. A good example is BRICS expansion, which has a large-scale international impact on global economy. So, as you know, 5 more countries joined BRICS on January 1st, 2024. The role of BRICS in the global economy is expanding with every new nation members because the interest to this cooperation is also exceeding. The role of BRICS in the global economy is so important that one of the main objectives which it states upon themselves is disrupt the Western hegemony, and for this purpose the new development bank was established in 2015, so-called the NDB Bank. It supports infrastructure and sustainable development projects which are in the line with the developmental goals of its member states, as well as Sustainable Development Goals and Paris agreements. So the global nation's economy size Russian economy size can be compared and is compared annually based on gross domestic product. However, there are 2 ways of comparing economy size across countries. Firstly, it is based on national GDP, which is recalculated at the official dollar, and the rate of the local currency, which is the example of the table on the left. And the second method is based on value recalculated GDP, which is based on purchasing power parity, GDP PPP. And in this case, if in a country the cost of goods in national currency and the official US dollar exchange rate differs more than 2 times, the recalculation of GDP will be very different. This is the example of the second table on the right. So using this Russia example of these 2 GDP results, we can see that according to PPP, meaning purchasing power parity, the ranking of Russian economy grows from 11th to 6th position. Therefore, much attention is paid to comparing the nominal GDP and the real GDP of the states. So if we compare nominal and real GDP, it allows us to measure the level of inflation of the national economy. For this purpose, the GDP deflator can be calculated It is an indicator that measures prices and their growth in production sector. Measuring GDP by purchasing power parity requires a unified approach to all nations, which helps to determine the value of values of certain goods for this or that country. And then it enables to compare the results of this value at domestic price in national currency and at the official US dollar exchange rate. And the results can be quite dramatically different. So also for which country which has a market economy, there are 4 microeconomic agents or participants. They can be identified according to their role in the economy. So these are households, firms, producers of goods, government as a regulator of the economy and at the same time a subject of economic activity, and the global external factor, which includes states and other economic relationships with this given state, with Russia, for example. And business activities in the market of households and firms form private sector of economy. Let's speak a bit about the role of the government in Russia, in Russian economy. We should say that it is not limited just to regulating the participants in the private sector of the economy. So, in addition to interfering in the market relationship between producers, consumers, it establishes taxes, provides subsidies to producers, and resolves different disputes. So the government also forms the state budget, which ensures the implementation of social welfare policy, and is also responsible for production of public goods related to the improvement of the territory, production of goods which are important for consumers but unprofitable for commercial entities. Government also ensures the allocation of budget investments to implement the necessary structural changes in the national economy. So these structural changes can be aimed at developing the most highly effective types of economic activities with the high technologies and high added value commodities. In the activities of global or external sector, the inclusion of which is interaction of households, firms, government, different forms, this is an open economy. So there are 2 great interests. Firstly, external investments in most interesting, profitable projects in this or that given country. The movements, so-called movements of global capital, and the solution of export-import issues, so especially when the country needs this or that commodity, which it should import, for instance. Also, at the level of national economy, there are 4 markets. We speak typically about economic resource market of goods, works and services, financial market, and the currency market. All these markets have their own national features, which are dependent on the owner's policy, supply, demand in the structure of domestic and global markets, and national currency legislation, for instance, of the Central Bank of Russia. So the following features are typical for economic resources. Typically, they are, of course, naturally scarce. So it is true both for national and global economies. Labor resources play a key role in the economy as well. They can be characterized by freedom of movements, not only within the nation but globally, the opportunity of continuous professional development, problem of motivation of work, fairness in distribution of goods created with the help of labor. Natural resources have the main problem, as we said, that this is their non-renewability. For example, fossil fuels will run out quite soon. Hence, growing demand for so-called high production and operation costs and a slow, large-scale introduction of renewable resources. So in the nearest future, it's evident that we all stick to fossils. However, renewables can help us. The market of goods, it also includes the market of works and services. So it is highly dependent on domestic producers and their capacity, as well as typical demand of local consumers and local businesses. In order to compensate for existing failures and deficit in the Russian economy, new international trade alliances are being developed. For example, new export and import support measures either aimed at stimulating or restraining the movements of goods and services are introduced. The financial assets market is the most open and attractive for financial capital investors. Openness is associated with the need to ensure equal rules of participation in different transactions on this market. The securities market also reflects the demand for the assets of corporations within the national economy, in the case of shares and for government bonds, in the case of government debt obligations. The Central Bank of Russia is a mega regulator of the financial market. The government monetary policy is formed by the central bank, which also determines the inflation policy. In order to control inflation, monetary policy measures are traditionally taken, and they require budget savings. They require increase in the key interest rate to curb the demand for credit resources. And this is the priority of Central Bank of Russia. We speak about the financial asset market or security markets, which includes shares which are issued by enterprises to build their authorized capital. So this is typically done in order to raise capital, in order to attract investments, with obligations to distribute profit later, which is made by the company to their shareholders in the form of dividends, and bonds, which are debt securities issued either by corporations or the government. We discussed that previously. The foreign exchange market is also important for Russian state and other participants in the economy. So in 2023, on exchange gold bullion trade intensified. So with the individuals beginning to play a major role in the Russian market. In accordance with the Nobel laureate Douglas North's theory of institution, an important rule for the development of economic system is formulated. It is not enough to make changes only to legislative acts or other regulations for the market participants. It is most important to influence their informal behavior and habits. So, the period of restructuring of Russian economy after the collapse of the USSR in 1990s, it can be considered the manifestation of dominance of informal decision-making rules and the ineffectiveness of formal ones. the global market economy evolution has led to the fact that at present most effective is the mixed model, which combines all methods of the economic activity which are necessary for growth, economic freedom of entrepreneurial activity, entrepreneurs, to ensure employment of the population, and they meet the demand for a range of goods, works and services. And at the same time, important role of government responsibility to ensure the safety of economic activity and accessibility of the widest possible range of goods to the population. The centrally controlled or administrative economy of Russia, which existed before 1991, which we discussed with you during our previous lectures, the advantages and disadvantages of which can be characterized by absence of private ownership, as you remember, the state production planning economy, so the centralized decision making, absence of private banking system, ban on any exchange transaction and entrepreneurial activity, and absence of a free financial market. So if we analyze the reasons right now why the Soviet Union collapsed, why this economy didn't stand to the difficulties of the country, we can state that there are some economic problems which the country faced, the whole nation faced during this period, which played the major role. So this was the crisis of centralized system of planning, of productions, of goods and services, budget deficit, and there was the crisis of intergovernment agreements with other countries, especially a former social camp, and weak competitive performance of national producers if we compare them to Western competitors, which fled the Russian market at that time of the collapse. If we look at the example of the Gorbachev perestroika, this is literally translated restructuring. We can see that how the reforms which were planned and could work well in theory didn't coincide with the reality, with the real state of affairs. So, but political reasons, which played a major role for the perestroika plan, caused that the situation that some irrational decisions for national interests of Russia were made. So another important problem was, of course, the lack of qualified personnel who could introduce market principles to nationwide economy of Russia. So how could people know, because there was a long period of Soviet command economy, how to transition to a market economy? That's why many mistakes were made. Typically, in the period of perestroika or restructuring, we can figure out three main periods. So you can see all stages there on the screen. We can say that at the initial stage, some very unpopular measures were taken. For example, there was anti-alcohol program. The ruling class had no idea how to cause this transformation to market economy. They had just some plans, but they undergone without serious preparation. Moral values were undermined of the population. National interests were neglected, and this was done very often for the sake of Western countries. At the same time, interethnic conflicts appeared, and the authority, the influence of the back then ruling party, the Communist Party, was also undermined. At the same time, freedom of speech was introduced, the censorship was abolished, and in the end, the Communist Party lost power. The opposition movements came to rule, emerged. Former republics of Soviet Union left the Soviet Union. New constitution was adopted. With all those changes, financial situation worsened, and it accompanied by serious brain drain. People, qualified specialists, were leaving Russia because there was no work, companies were closed, businesses were closed, etc. So, in addition to internal problems of the Soviet Union and the collapse, there was, of course, external factors. So we can now prove that some foreign countries of the West, striving not only to defeat the political opponent, the Soviet Union, but also to get access to huge natural resources of Russia and the former Soviet Union republics. So they wanted the sales market to be also the market for their producers, and they wanted to destroy the economy of Russia, of the Soviet Union. The list of internal reasons for the Soviet Union collapsed include, among others, high bureaucracy or the red tape. People were not involved in management of the economy, of the structural process. The political institutions were often out of reach of population. There was serious technological lag, ineffective economic reforms, and the neglect of consumer good products in favor to heavy industry, what meant that we had great industrial capacities. However, ordinary people could not buy food. So I remember that in my childhood, during the collapse of the Soviet Union, the country introduced per capita food stamps for sugar, for eggs, for meat, for soap, and other everyday commodities. So, as we spoke about external reasons of the so-called oil needle, it also played an important and major role in Soviet Union collapse. So, what is it, oil needle? So, in the late 1980s, Western countries took advantage of Soviet Union dependence on oil sales and collapsed oil prices, which of course led to sharp decline in Russian state budget revenues and impoverishment of Russian population. External reasons also included Cold Wars, arms race, which even further increased military budget expenditures, of course to the detriment of production of consumer goods. And there were some other reasons. If we analyze the history of 1991, the most difficult decision for Russian society and enterprises was the decision to completely release prices to free formation, so-called price liberalization. The main mistake which was made back then by modern economists was this effect which they liberalized prices before privatization of enterprises. As a result, against the background of production shortages, growing dependence on import, there was a terrible increase in prices, which led to impossibility of the emergence of new Russian economic model after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So we had to go through various different other stages in order to achieve that, and we're still undergoing those transformations. So in 1991, during 1 year, there was extreme we can say impoverishment of population, inability to carry out effective transformation and the development of national production, because there was high competition from import. Super monopolization led to 100 or even 150 times price increase, so while wages grew only 10 or 15 times. As a result, over 30% of the Russian population were below poverty line. It was a seriously difficult moment. Within 1 year of 1992, the shock therapy of then acting Prime Minister Yegor Gaidar was implemented. In economics, shock therapy is usually referred to as the most radical, as you can understand from its name, measures of anti-crisis activities, when in the difficult periods only the most healthy and healthiest, the strongest enterprises should stay on the market, and the insolvency is a normal purification procedure, so all those which are not strong enough should be just gotten to insolvency. However, as a result of this policy, the Russian economy sharply increased its dependence on International Monetary Fund loans. So it was also our Western friends' trap. So-called loans required further price liberalization. So further price liberated caused again inflation growth. So it was like a vicious circle. The situation was aggravated by privatization of the Russian enterprises. It began in 1993, when these enterprises were massively bought by foreign companies. So these Soviet great enterprises, they were bought by Western companies, bankrupted, and the goal was to liberate the new market for their products and to compete former Soviet competitors. Large industrial enterprises which produced ship, aircrafts, vehicles were also privatized, and they were also bankrupted, which led to complete loss of the economic sovereignty of Russia back then, of new country after the collapse. So we were completely dependent. And there was the role which we got, the supply of cheap resources to global economy, including mineral resources, fossils, profitable markets for goods and services, and especially transnational corporations, Western enterprises, got a lot of positive feedbacks from this. So the inflation is one of the main targets of government regulation, and it is constant in modern economic relations. So we just quickly revise two ways of measuring inflation, so that we can use, as you remember, the index of PPI, so-called producer price index, GDP deflator, or a consumer price index. So it's more like theoretical slide, but you can say that an inverse relationship between two economic indicators, employment and inflation, can be established. This is the Phillips curve, meaning that the lower the unemployment rate is, the faster the inflation grows, and vice versa. With a high unemployment rate, purchasing power of population decreases, and the demand for goods also decreases considerably. So if we compare changes in the United States inflation, so over 1960 and 2000, including the period of oil crisis, which led to problems in the economic development of the United States. It was in the late 70s, early 80s of the 20th century. We see that the maximum increase in inflation was in 1980. It was 13%. But if we compare the situation with the Russian economy of 1990s, the inflation rate hit record heights of more than 25 times within 1 year. It reached 2,500%. So let us discuss some common problems for Russia and global economies. The most important is, of course, inflation. Modern economic theories identify causes of inflation that are typical for all countries, and for Russia they are also active. So this includes imbalance of government expenditures and revenues, abuse of the state opportunity to switch on printing press, the consequences of monopolization of the economy, inflationary dangerous investments, for example, increased militarization of the economy, which leads to exponential government spending and growth, and of course the public debt increase. And another cause of inflation is openness of the economy, so-called important inflation, as a result of globalization process and the dependence of the national economy on global process. So all these causes of inflation are relevant for Russia. Let's compare two optional approaches to the development of the implementation of inflation management policy. So firstly, there is active budget policy. We call it a Keynesian demand regulation, which is accompanied by increase in government spending, investments into national production, the growth, in order to support and sometimes reduction in interest rates on loans. On the other hand, active monetary policy, on the contrary, it increases the interest rates on loans, causes reduction in aggregate demand and reduces the budget deficit. So this is the reduction in budget expenditures. So in fact, in Russia, we can say that government has to apply mixed approach. When the central bank has a strict policy of interest rates growth, the government has to conduct the social policy, and these are a bit controversial demands. Another important problem of modern Russian economy is unemployment. We know that there are two approaches to measuring the unemployment, which is in force for Russian national labor market, which is conducted within the framework of national legislation. It has some age limits of the working population, and they are established by the government of the Russian Federation. And the grounds for incapacity, for instance, disability of people, they are also established by the government, as well as terms for which the specific pension can be attributed. And another approach, it is conducted within the framework of international approach of International Labor Organization, when an unemployed person has not had a job for some period of time, is actively looking for this period for the work and is ready to start. So the number of economically active population is determined within a unified global approach in this year, starting from the 15 years of age. Currently in Russia, the situation with unemployment is a bit different. So the rate of unemployment reduced considerably, and this is also connected with militarization of the economy, when we require lots of new specialists and the outflow of specialists to other countries, and of course the development of national economy currently, which is undertaken. Determining full population employment can be characterized by presence of only natural unemployment, which is an important dimension of the labor market. Full employment corresponds to the maximum capacity of national economy. So natural unemployment includes frictional unemployment and structural unemployment. So there are some differences. We will not stand too long over those questions. However, over the period of 2000 to 2023, there is a significant change which took place in the Russian economy, and it is aimed at restoring previously lost opportunities for domestic production and increase in competition at the global level. Let us present the basic composition of the strengths and weaknesses of the Russian economy, the presence of which indicates a difficult path to restore the scale and advantages of national economy. So the strength of Russian economy include the fact that we have the largest reserves, as you remember, of natural resources, mineral, forests, water resources, which are accompanied by favorable geographical location, availability of logistics routes from connecting Asia and Europe, and considerable intellectual potential, both over the history which had take place in Russia and currently. Space industry is quite well developed. There's a military industrial complex being developed. High-tech industries in healthcare, in finance, and real estate market are introduced. So on the one hand, inclusion of global economic process is typical of the world economy. It requires compliance with the global agenda which includes, of course, respect for sustainable development goals. They are addressed at the national level through a system of economic incentives and a specific taxation introduced to those who do not respect the sustainable development goals. They are also aimed at unifying standards of quality of life. On the other hand, due to particularities of location and historical traditions, which are developed in the standard of living, the income differences of different territories of Russia, in the structure of Russian economy, we can say that there is high level of inequality. This is also a serious weakness. The weakness of the Russian economy growth includes a high share of shadow economy. So shadow economy, especially during the latest periods, reaches up to 60% of GDP in some areas, and differences in available resources, income and life quality are also very, very different on the large territory of Russia, but they're aimed at being unified. Another major factor is that the destructive consequences of the 1990s have not yet been overcome. So there is still the dominance of transnational corporations in the domestic market, which have, of course, has negative impact. This globalization of national economic sovereignty, and now we are talking about the importance of achieving this economic sovereignty under the sanctions of West. So one of the priority goals of sustainable development of Russia is social equality, as well as accessibility of a number of benefits, rights to all the Russian citizens, regardless of their place of residence, income level, etc. For the economy, the priority goal is to achieve sovereignty, sustainability, and, of course, environmental friendliness. So if we use the example of national project demography, so in Russia we have a number of national projects implemented, and currently one of the leading is national project demography. So there is the goal to overcome the existing differences in development of some territories of our huge, large country. So using the example of the Russian Arctic regions, for example, in which due to climatic restrictions and difficulties, there are some special budgets are allocated of the government to support the population, to support the economy in those areas. This is a typical procedure. For instance, other countries do as well such things. For instance, the United States, the Canada, they support such activities, economic activities in climatically difficult and challenging areas. There is a strong differences which are observed in the value, in some cases almost twofold differences from target indicators. You can see it on the screen. The modern businesses and the condition for modern business of the economy are also corresponded to sustainable development goals. Identified by the UN, which requires implementation of new models. The example of the so-called circular economy, which was introduced into national economy and is being implemented currently, allows also careful attitude not only to economic resources, but also to manufacturing products, to extending the service of life, increasing the share of recycled products, and giving more opportunities for business process development. So through circular economy, it is possible to overcome all those shortcomings that have been identified in modern economic model, namely high dependence on non-renewable resources, large percentage of production of waste, decrease in personnel activity, large percentage of illiquid products, and high damage to the environment. Another promising area of economic development within this sharing economy is the direction of progressive changes which take place in order to increase interaction between the participants of economic activities. For example, when individuals directly interact regarding their rental or other interests, purchasing goods directly at more affordable prices. But the main problem here in the sharing economy is that it needs to be solved in the format of ensuring and maintaining trust and, of course, security of the individuals involved in this area. And this is also the role of the government. Another important trend in modern economy, which is, of course, availability of digital technologies and the level of automation of certain processes in the productions of goods, works, and services. So automation or digitalization, digital transformation are carried out simultaneously, but at different rates. And of course, with different results. We have also the national project, which is called digitalization, and it shows the level of digitalization in different subjects of the Russian Federation, which is quite different. Of course, the most technologically developed are the areas of multi-million cities where there is the smart city technology introduced, where AI is actively introduced. But there are also some dangers to introduction of those elements at massive scale. Digital economy is based on improving technologies for collecting, storing, possessing big data in the digital format. So the content of scientific research is aimed at developing new designs and technologies that would ensure improvement of individual business processes. And of course, it is very important. The national digitalization project of Russia is aimed at those goals. So both digitalization and development of sharing economy might be the solution to sustainable economic development problems that we are facing still right now. And it might be also the solution to global environmental crisis, including the shortages of non-renewable resources, fossils, the problems of hunger and growing inequality. The clear positive effect of the sharing economy can be observed on the example of food sharing programs. It's just one of the area, like when non-governmental organizations like NGOs or government, which are called upon the legislative level, they play a significant role in the development of this area. So most successful are digital food sharing platforms, which are quite effectively cooperating in Russia. Why do we introduce them? So they're aimed at helping the most vulnerable population at the level of some specific digital platforms to obtain food at lower prices, maybe the food which is close to its expiry date but still eatable, and it also helps to reduce the food waste. And food sharing is very popular and promising, as I said, both in Russia and globally. The attitude to feed the home, and there is also the possibility to use home composters to ensure processing food and food wastes to be later used as fertilizers at the level of private businesses is also a very interesting and promising option. Currently in Russia, at the level of federal ministries, there is a very specific issue of large-scale state support for social initiative to increase the volume of food production and redistribution through food sharing platforms. It is being resolved. So Russian economic security strategy until 2030 is being implemented, and it is also very important within the framework of sanctions and military aggressions of some countries, which clearly identifies the key threats and risks to the country's economic security. So the threat to the Russian economy include, of course, the discriminatory measures against the key sectors of Russian economy, which restrict the access to foreign capital resources and modern technologies of Russia, and maintaining significant share of shadow economy, going outside the raw material export model of economic development. These are the three very important problems of the Russian economy. And protecting Russian national economic interests require the formation of sustainable, innovative basis for economic development. It is a crucial importance for our country nowadays. This systematic approach to the formation of high innovative level of economic activity should include, firstly, training of qualified personnel, specific educational needs which we still are facing, so with the lack of people employed in the area, qualified people. We need to ensure favorable business climate with specific taxation system, etc., and the existence of effective system for formation and dissemination of knowledge that ensures the creation of innovative goods and services. So innovation is a very important issue in Russian economy, so it is high in demand. We need to provide environmental safe conditions for implementation of innovative technologies. So not only economic growth, but still it should take into consideration the innovative opportunities and respect for the nature. For the purpose of developing of national industry, Russia has an important substitution policy. It is aimed at achieving Russian technological sovereignty. This led to the launch of so-called planned unprofitable projects, which are unprofitable but really necessary for formation of national economic sovereignty, and they are currently being implemented. Considerable budget funds through the Russian Industrial Development Funds are allocated to support production of medicines, shipbuilding, car industry, electronics, aircraft manufacturing. So we're trying to restore the economic sovereignty which we had in the Soviet period, but using modern technologies. In 2019, the pandemic greatly affected the labor market when forms of remote employment, self-employment were introduced, the freelance employment. So this greatly affected the global labor market and, of course, the Russian labor market, and introduced movements of migration processes. For national labor market, this may result in erosion of intellectual personnel due to the availability of more attractive working conditions for them. So there's again the opportunity of brain drain of specialists, especially in the IT area. So of course this encourages local employees to constantly improve working conditions. And the conditions and the pay opportunities for the employees in some very demanding areas. Using the decent work conditions indicator established by International Labour Organization, as an example, you can see that there are some key indicators which are monitored to measure the labor market to protect the right of the employed population. So among those indicators, we see the most important ones. Firstly, this is youth unemployment rate, working poverty rate, and fatal occupational injury severity rate. So in these figures, you can see an example of changes in decent work indicators in Russia over the period of 2001 and 2021. So there is a positive trend which includes a noticeable decrease in unemployment rate, as we speak with you about this, and it's still active, but the negative trend is present by the increase of the share of informal or shadow economy employment in the Russian Federation. There are also such important indicators as decrease in overtime work, so more than 48 hours, which doesn't lead to violation of workers' right, employers' right, and uneven changes in the share of low-paid employees, including for gender inequality reasons, so-called gender gap, wage gap. So when the share of women with low wages is higher than the men who work at higher paying jobs. But this presents changes in the value of two more decent work indicators. The percentage of gender wage gap for men and women, which is explained among other things by really the fact that men are employed at more dangerous and challenging work at which women just cannot work because of their physical limitation, and the wages are objectively higher. And there are also reduction of fatal and non-fatal occupational injury severity rate, so due to growing automation and of the hazardous industries. So there is also an increased and efficiency control of the government of the conditions of safe workplace, which is also a very, very good and positive trend. On this slide, there are two more decent work indicators which are related to results of government policy implementations. So this is the change in the proportions of older persons which receive the pension. Here we can see a negative impact of COVID-19 pandemics in 2020. The indicator increased to 76.2% due to unplanned changes in the labor market, including high mortality among the reduction and the retired personnel and quite aged population. And on the other hand, we can see a positive trend, which includes the growth of public social security expenditures from 2 to 12 and even 14% from the gross domestic product. In general, characterizing the impact on the global and national labor market on the one hand, and the impact of COVID-19 pandemics on the other hand, digitalization, we can see that there are the following trends which affect the migration flows. So the pandemic of COVID-19 caused the acceleration of the shift to remote work, the emergence of new remote forms of labor relations, reduced territorial inequality, and increased market opportunities. On the one hand, there were some changes to the structure of supply and demand in the labor market. And at the same time, the growth of digitalization processes caused the employers, increased the employers' interest in influence of reducing the human factor, so meaning that probably it is not always interesting to employ real humans, and if it is possible to employ digital replacement. And as we said, from positive trends, we can call the smart cities technologies, which are widely introduced in Russia, and especially in multi-million population cities, and they show very high effectiveness. The growth of digital economy, the sharing economy, new jobs with the new functionality also appear. So, however, personnel training systems sometimes lag behind the needs of modern economy. So this is also one of the challenges of Russian economy nowadays. In April 2023, there was a survey of the Russian population which showed the constituency rate of the importance of national goals. So they gave the first place to the goal of decent and efficient work and successful entrepreneurship conditions. So those 84% people who were interested in those moments. And also, a comfortable and safe living environment was important. The opportunities for self-realization, talent development are approximately equally important for Russians. The fourth place is reserved by the population to the health and well-being of people. and digital transformation is closes the top 5 most relevant national goals. And if we compare those results to a bit earlier survey conducted during the COVID pandemic in Russia, it was in, if I'm not mistaken, 2021, there were some population value guidelines that were identified, which we need as a population to develop to improve the quality of life. And there were such qualities and values named as sustainable development and environmental friendliness. So you can see the shift, a bit of a shift in this area. The Russians pay at the same time less attention to, for instance, competition, so they think that it's enough in Russian people developed, and individualism, control, and strong vertical power is not also in favor among the Russian trends. Empathy, patriotism have become also very important values, and as we spoke in previous lectures, the interest to the development is rising from 61 to 67% of all Russians. So the following measures aimed at implementing these values and guidelines can be considered. For instance, the development of urban agriculture, the growth of green economy, green transport, and the promotion of careers which involved innovation, products creation. However, high shadow economy and shadow employment indicators pose serious problems in achieving the strategic goals of economic development. So about 20% of the total working population are currently employed in informal sector of the economy. Trade, agriculture, construction works are typical economic activities which are the highest indicators of the shadow employment. So it is noticeable that during the periods of economic crisis, the share of the shadow economy grows. For example, calculations of the shadow economy of one of the federal districts of the southern federal districts, shows that the volume of the shadow economy fluctuates from 20 to 60 in different periods, 20 to 60%. As a result of current trends in the digital economy, we can say that the trends can include the ensuring constant growth in labor productivity of the employed population, the increase in effectiveness of state and social policy that protects the right of poor citizens of most vulnerable populations, minimizing the carbon footprint of economic activities, and the achievement of economic sovereignty, sustainability of Russia, especially in the period of economic sanctions from the West. At the same time, it is necessary to build protective mechanisms against the shadow economy. So, to combat understatement of tax payments, which are caused by shadow economy, shadow employment, and product quality control, which should prevent negative consequences from counterfeit goods and smuggling and different manifestations of shadow economy. So, and the last but not the least, this is the environmental protection as a habitat and the important component of Russian global population lifestyle. So this is the end of our lecture today. I thank you very much for your attention and hope to see you again. Goodbye.